Hello everybody, this is a lecture on human population dynamics. It coincides with chapter 6 of our textbook. What? We're eating cake. Please disregard any of the bloopers as this is our first film. Okay, for most of human history, our population growth has been roughly stable. And if you look at here, 10,000 BC, 8,000 BC, 6,000 BC, all the way up until roughly the Industrial Revolution is where our rate significantly has increased to exponential levels. And currently our population is about 7.4, 7.6, and it is still growing to this particular moment. Largely because populations are going through the demographic transition, which we'll go on in later. So some notable events that increased our human population was the agricultural revolution. That was 10,000 BC. And so we're leaving the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and now we are getting roots. We're building fences. We're now planting fruits and vegetables, and we are able to stay in a stable environment. This increases food production, which was a problem back in the day, and now our population is starting to grow. Then advancements in sanitation, washing the hands, the germ theory, that has also increased our human population, as well as the Industrial Revolution, where we are really good with producing food, and now we're going to a mechanized world where we have machines to help us. So those have contributed to the overall population growth. And so right now we're experiencing a boom. So how can we calculate growth rate? There's a couple of things that we need to take into consideration. The word crude. Crude means over 1,000. So for instance, the crude birth rate would be how many births per 1,000 people. Crude death rate would be how many births per 1,000 people. The crude immigration rate would be how many people coming into the country per 1,000 people, and emigration would be how many people leaving a country per 1,000. If we take all those numbers into consideration, we could then use a formula to calculate our growth rate. And just make note, any positive number on our growth rate leads to exponential growth. If we had a growth rate of 0, we would actually have a stable population. And the underlying theme of all of our problems on our planet right now is our population growth. And so if we could bring that down to 0, we could stay at a carrying capacity, and if we live sustainably, we could live indefinitely. But currently, if our population continues to grow exponentially, we will eventually supersede our carrying capacity, and our population will go down. So over here on the left, you're going to see a formula to calculate our growth rate. We have our crude birth rate plus our crude immigration rate. We're going to subtract our crude death rate and our immigration rate, and we're going to come up with our growth rate. When we do that, we're going to have a number over 1,000. When we get that number over 1,000, remember in class we have spoke about moving the decimal over 1, and that is going to be your growth rate in percent. So if you could take a minute right now and try to solve this question right here. So I have to add the births, I have to add the people immigrating into the country, and so we have 25 plus 15, which is 40, and that we're going to subtract 20 and 12, which is 32. So 40 minus 32 is 8. 8 over 1,000, we're going to move the decimal over 1, and so our growth rate here is 0.8%. Now you may not think that's a big number, but 0.8% at 7.4, 7.7 billion people, that's significant growth. And here is a really interesting graph, and notice a trend from the 60s all the way to 2000, and we're about 2010, 2018. What's happening to our growth rate is we're going down. But if you notice the graph, we're still at a positive number. So as long as we're at a positive number, we're still experiencing exponential growth. Another thing we need to take into consideration is TFR, or total fertility rate. This is the number that is going to be the total number of births per family or woman. If we want a stable population, each family should have 2 children. If we go over that, then we will be experiencing exponential growth. If we go underneath that, we will actually experience a decline. So what makes a family decide to have more than 2 children or less than 2 children is a bunch of different things, and it also relates to the demographic transition. Typically, in stage 1, stage 2, the demographic transition, birth rates are high, death rates are high in stage 1. Death rates fall in stage 2, birth rates remain high because we are living in the farm. We need a lot of children to help with the farm. There is no social security, so therefore children are seen as a security system as parents age. Also, in less developed countries or in certain situations, women aren't given the opportunity to enter the workforce or have experienced education. And this is going to make women have babies earlier in age, and if they have babies earlier in age throughout their whole lifetime, they're going to have more babies than roughly 2. So if you start reproducing at around 14 and you don't stop till maybe you're 40, you may have had more than 2 children. This is very different from developed countries. In the United States, I think we did a hands up in our class, and everybody was roughly around 2 children that you thought that you may have in the general future. Some people did say 1, and some people did say 3. The 1s could balance out the 3s, and that ultimately will lead us to a total fertility rate of 2. Okay, and so let's look at this picture here. And in this picture here, we have total fertility rate. So this is how many offspring and averages in 2010. Zambia, Rwanda, people are roughly having about 5 kids per family. And if we look at the US we're right around 2, which is a pretty good number. And China is underneath 2. This is 2010. They had that one-child policy instilled in 1979, which is going to be abolished in 2016. But they are below 2 or just around 2. We notice Poland is at 1, Russia 1.5. I wish we had Germany here, because Germany you may actually see 1 or lower than 1. And if you do that, you're going to experience a population decline. Let's keep going. Okay, how do we achieve 0 population growth? So, like I said, if women don't have the opportunity for an education or entering the job force, they tend to start families at a young age. So if we could delay that, we're going to slow our population growth. So one thing is provide educational opportunities for women, and the government can do that by making laws. We could also provide countries with contraceptives and medical advancements for family planning, because a lot of less developed countries don't even understand how populations are going to increase and ways to prevent this. So by education and contraceptives and the ability to afford contraceptives, people can lower the human population. Social acceptance. In the United States, it's becoming more and more popular to have 2 or even 1 child or even no children. And social acceptance is a big pressure, because certain people will have children because other people want them to have children. Grandparents typically are going to want children for their daughters and sons and so on and so forth. Social Security. If the government has Social Security, old people won't tend to have a lot of offspring because they're not fearful of not having any resources when they're older. So there's another push to slow population growth. Urbanization, no longer a farm living. We're now having a mechanized world, and we no longer need a big population to work the farm. So a move towards urbanization could also slow population growth. So here I found this really cool image, and this is contraceptive methods in India, and they're also comparing them between men and women. Female sterilization, about 74.4% practicing female sterilization, 11.4 condoms, 7.5 pills, 3.7 IUDs, 2.3 male sterilization, so we're having a very low percentage in male sterilizations, and 0.6% others. And so in comparison, India, US, Brazil, China, and UK, this is prevalence rates of sterilizations in total. Okay. So here's a nice comparison there: female sterilizations, male sterilizations. All right, let's keep going. So here we have a formula to calculate something called doubling time, and we use a formula called the rule of 70. And so what we want to do is take 70 and divide that by the growth rate, and when we get that, we're going to get the time in years that it takes for a population to double in its size. And so here we have an example of 7% growth rate. So we take 70 divided by 7%, we have 10 years. So that means it takes 10 years for that population to double. If we had a population of 10, in how many years would it reach 160? So we take 10 doubles to 20, doubles to 40, doubles to 80, doubles to 160. So we have a total of 5 doubling times. Each doubling time is 10 years, so 5 times 10 is 50 years. And so this gives us a 50 years when that population would reach 160. So here we have the age structure pyramids, and these age structure pyramids, you want to get really familiar with them. They're always on exams, so you definitely want to take a look at them. Here we have 3 patterns. We have a triangle, okay, and I don't want you to get this confused with stage 1 of the demographic transition. This is more like stage 2. This shape is going to say that Kenya is going to have a boom in population when in a couple of years, because as soon as the 0 and 4 and 5 and 9-year-olds get to reproductive age from 15 and 19 to 20, you're going to have a boom here, and then that means there's going to be a bigger triangle here. So for Kenya needs a way to keep up with their population, so imports, exports have to improve, food productions also have to improve for Kenya. In the United States, we want to say that this is going to take more of a no curve, or I'm trying to draw a straight line here. If that was a straight line, we're going to experience slow growth or no growth. So the amount of people who are being born are going to equal to the amount of people who are dying. And this would be good. This would be good for a particular population. Once we have this, then we could plan a number of jobs, number of resources, and so on and so forth. And if food production is okay, it doesn't mean that we're going to need an additional food source. We have pretty much stable growth at that point. In this area over here, I'm going to over-exaggerate the image, but it's going to be the opposite of this. And this is when you have a population that is going to be top-heavy, and you have a lot more of the individuals that are older than are younger. And in this situation, the population is decreasing. And if the population is decreasing for long enough, sooner or later you're not going to have a population, not going to have a country. Germany, Japan, Italy are in this situation. And they're trying to bring more people into their countries. And how do you do that? How do you make people want to go into your country? Well, you could give them opportunities to medical advancements, you could give them opportunities to jobs, you could give them opportunities for education. I know I saw a commercial for Germany. They were offering free school in Germany because they're really trying to recruit the younger workforce, because sooner or later they're not going to have one. Okay? All right, so become very familiar with these images. You may see them on tests. Of course, you may see them on the AP exam because they're always on them. Also, we want to try to distinguish between this one and this one. And here, we're saying that hardly anybody gets old. Hardly anybody is going to reach reproductive age in stage 1. Stage 2, this is like that Kenya. High birth rates, but death rates begin to fall, so the population starts to grow like crazy. We're going to say this is stage 3 is the United States. And then we'll probably say stage 4 is Germany, Japan, and Italy. Okay, where now the amount of young people being born aren't going to replace the older population. All right. Okay, what can affect the sex ratio of a given country? And so here's another age structure diagram, and notice that we have far significant more males than females in the United Arab Emirates, and this was taken in 2009. And I did some research on here, and in the research, a lot of people go to the United Arab Emirates for work. And so while they go for work, most of these are males, they're laborers, and they're doing work, and they're the large makeup of the population are immigrants going in there for work related. And so you could see a skewed ratio where you have far more males than females in a given country like this. Certain times you may see this in the opposite, where you have a lot more females than males, and those reasons may be because of war, they may be because of a preferred sex. Maybe a country wanted more girls than boys, and maybe in China, no, I'm not going to say those things like that, but there are certain people preferred one sex than the other, which could basically skew the sex ratio. And so all you guys out there, or girls out there, if you want to see some countries that have outnumbered women to men or men to women ratio, you can click on this link over here. I think Latvia has a lot more women to men, and you could research there to see why. And it's a pretty interesting little link there. All right, let's continue here. In this slide here, we have a 4-stage model of the demographic transition. This is stage 1. Birth rates and death rates are relatively high. Population is low. In stage 2, we're going to call this the pre-industrial. This one we're going to be calling the transitional. This one is going to be called the industrial, and this is going to be called the post-industrial. Stage 2, birth rates remain high, death rates start to fall, population starts to climb. In stage 3, as long as the birth rates are higher than the death rates, you're still going to get a population growth. When these are stable, now we're going to have zero growth or a stability of reaching carrying capacity. And in our next slide, you'll see a 5 transition model. And so you need to be able to understand what's happening between birth rates, death rates, and populations as you are looking at these models. Here we have a 5-stage model of the demographic transition. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, Stage 4, Stage 5. Just adding another stage to the demographic transition from the previous slide. Once again, death rates and birth rates are high, population remains low. Death rates start to fall, birth rates remain high, population starts to grow. At this point, people are saying maybe we don't need to have as many babies. Birth rate starts to fall, but as long as it's higher than the death rate, the population continues to grow. When this equals this, now we have stability. And then finally, when certain people believe that they don't need to have that many children, their birth rate would actually go below the death rate and the population starts to decline. And so I need you to know certain countries that you would be able to name if I was to say, let's say if your birth rate was low and your death rate was low, that would be United States. And so your natural increase would be stable or slow increase. Now the big difference between Germany and the United States is that your birth rate would be very low. So very low in Germany, your death rate is low, but your birth rate is very low, and so you have a slow decrease. Okay, so you need to know this information in these categories. All right, so be able to answer questions in these categories over here. So a case study on America. We are a pretty stable country in relevance to population growth. How did we achieve this? Giving women the opportunity to go to school and have a career has delayed the first child rearing. Social Security exists here in the United States, and so people no longer have children as a security policy. And we have also switched to more of a urbanized world, which we are no longer working the farms when we need that many children. And so now the people tend to have smaller families and devote more resources to those children. Okay. In this slide here, we have a case study on China. And in 1979, know that date, it was a year before I was born. I was born in 1980. You do the math, figure out how old I am. In 1979, China instilled a one-child policy. And they did this in order to slow their population growth, because they are the #1 most populated country in the world. They tried to decrease their population because there was a lot of pulls for resources around that time. Notably, 1958 to 1962, it's estimated about 50 million Chinese people died of starvation or widespread famine. And so how do you control that? If your population just keeps reproducing, there's not enough resources for all that. Well, you can instill a policy like the one-child policy. In 2016, they have now given rise to a two-child policy. And so now in China you could have 2 children. And they did this because they were having an aging community. And who was paying for all these old people with taxes, or if you had one sibling raising 2 old people, or one child raising 2 parents, they're no longer working. You're trying to have your own family. How are you going to have your own family if you have to take care of your grandparents as well? And it's complicated. And so their case study mostly is about the one-child policy instilled in 1979. You can watch this video at your own time. It talks about the famine in China between 1958 and 1962. In India, they're their 2nd most populated country in the world, and they have been experiencing a great growth. And their growth rate is actually shrinking. However, when your population is 1.4 billion, any positive number is going to experience exponential growth. Mostly as the country has been developing, education, use of contraceptives, women entering the workforce, increasing literacy rates, this has all slowed population growth for India. And here's a cool little video that you can watch at your leisure to learn a little bit on how India is developing.